Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Loren Richmond Jr. is in conversation with Bekah Buchterkirchen. Bekah is a writer, speaker, and creative collaborator passionate about cultivating joy and faith in every season. With nearly a decade in Christian higher education and ministry alongside her pastor husband, she seeks to create spaces where curiosity, hospitality, and the love of Jesus meet. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with their 2, almost 3 young kids and writes to encourage moms in the trenches of motherhood to seek the Lord daily, even when they feel like it's not enough. A reminder before we start today's conversation. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Connect with Loren, Martha, and Future Christian on Instagram. Shoot us an email at loren@resonatemediapro.com with comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes. We appreciate your voice in how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
Hello and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Loren Richmond Jr., and today I'm pleased to be joined by Bekah Buchterkirchen. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to having this conversation. Is there anything else you want listeners to know about you?
Yeah, when thinking about the conversation we're going to dive into, I was thinking it might be helpful for listeners to know that I worked for nearly a decade in Christian higher education at 3 different institutions. And all during 8 of those years, my husband has also been in seminary alongside pastoral ministry. So for the 2 of us, we have been deeply formed by theological education. And we also really believe in the local church, despite all the chaos of the past several years. And so I think for me, how I try to always approach conversations like these is to not show up thinking I have the answers, but with a heart that's still being formed and is generally curious. So I'm looking forward to what we'll be discussing today.
Absolutely. Appreciate that perspective. Do you want to share a bit about your faith journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today?
Yeah. So I was really fortunate to grow up in an entire family, including all of my extended family that have known Jesus, walked with Jesus for decades. And so I like to say that I really feel like I have known and loved Jesus ever since I was a little girl. And it has just been this gradual process of getting to know him on a deeper level all throughout my life. Surprisingly, I didn't really have this falling away sort of season. And for me, I think in the past, looking back on it, I grew up in public school my whole life until I went away to a private Christian college. And that's when the Bible just became very real to me. And I gained a lot of head knowledge.
Yeah.
But then I think where I struggled was, wait a second, now that I have all this head knowledge, how is it supposed to impact my heart? And how do I don't know. It's kind of strange to me that I think a lot of the times when we grow in our knowledge of God and the scriptures, a lot of time pride can get in there.
Yeah.
And so what it means for me to be a Christian now, it has looked a lot more like soul care. And I think with my husband having served in pastoral ministry, getting to sit in front of people and listen and hear their stories and see the way that God has been moving in their life, that's really been a beautiful opportunity for me to try to experience not just head knowledge, but also heart knowledge, and how does it impact everything we do.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious just because this is a theme that I've been following a lot even if informally with guests too, as I've followed this sort of on the broader trend. Like, obviously there's no like formula, right? This is, I think, a mistake that often happens in some Christian circles is like, we have the formula for raising our kids so they will not depart from the faith. Like, is there anything like you think that your parents or your Christian faith context did right to kind of help you not have that typical like falling away?
Gosh, I think about that often too, especially now raising my own kids,
Yeah,
where I'm like,
right.
what? Okay, what was it? Because I have two siblings, and similarly, they both love Jesus. And the only thing that I can think of in my own personal life is I like to say that I'm a product of mentorship, like very intentional discipleship. And my parents didn't assume that they were going to be the sole tenders of making sure that they pass on the generation of faith.
Yeah.
And so I had several men and women within our local church context that poured into me and that were just present in my life, and I looked up to them. And so because of that, I think it helped me stay rooted when situations arose where it would have been easy for me to stray.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing that. What kind of spiritual practice do you find meaningful today or help you sustain your faith?
Yeah. So right now for me, I made the really hard decision a year ago to not return to full-time work outside of the home after my second kiddo was born. And I think being a full-time caretaker now to little kids, I grieved how much my relationship with God changed. My husband and I were married for 7 years before we became parents, and that gave me a lot of time to develop practices and rhythms that helped me feel healthy. And then once I had kids, all of that just got thrown out the window, where you're like, wait a second, I don't have time to just sit in stillness and read scripture or journal or whatever. So for me, it's been over the last several years, a practice that I regularly return to has been breath prayers. And those are just, they're monumental for me. They're like my lifeline throughout the day when I start to feel frustrated or like I'm losing my patience, just to have some sort of scripture that I can breathe in, breathe out, and rest in the knowledge that God is with me, the Spirit is present, and I can continue about my day.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I had Bekah on to talk about her experience in theological education. This is a topic that I think is incredibly important to the future of the church, you know, broadly speaking, for our context and America's sake. And we're undergoing, like, obviously a serious time of just change and disruption with attendance, institutional stability. Like, I mean, you name the disruption, like, we're experiencing it. And I've primarily approached this conversation just from my most recent situation or context being in mainline Protestantism, but certainly I follow evangelical institutions, and I'm curious, like, to talk about how these same dynamics or challenges are playing out in those contexts. So, I guess first of all, you know, I think it's interesting, like you said, like, you worked in a seminary, your husband attended it, so you really saw like both sides of it very well. Like, what do you think, like, just to start out, like, what are the biggest challenges facing seminaries as institutions today?
Oh man, it's such a good question. And I think the hardest part about it is, like you're saying, it's not just one thing,
Right.
which makes it so challenging. But a few things that really have stood out to me are, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the seminary and theological education was born out of the church. And I think over the years, we have seen that kind of start to divide a little bit, where it's no longer integrated as thoughtfully as it maybe once was. I know even for my husband, with applying to different churches, it's no longer a requirement at many churches that you have to have theological training. And that has even been a really interesting shift to see. So I feel like at kind of like the broader level, it's churches who need to almost be convinced, like, why does theological education still matter? And how can it actually impact our congregation? Because then what it ends up lending itself to is the seminary that I worked at, we didn't have a large endowment that was able to offset the significant rising costs.
Right.
And when that's the case, you have to partner with the church to be able to say, hey, what about cohort-based models? Are you open to doing that? Hey, could we use your facilities to be able to host classes? Or if you have a pastor or even like a person on staff that is helping to care for your flock, would you be willing to financially contribute a little bit? And then our seminary would be happy to match that to make it more affordable for the student. So I think those are just like some of the initial things that come to mind. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's good. You're kind of stealing our thunder here. So I'm glad you just hinted at, I guess you gave a little teaser there to cohorts and endowments. So we'll hopefully come back and explore that here in a little bit. Something I think you can especially speak to, I'm hoping, as you served, Dean of Students, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my previous guests was John Hawthorne, who had a long history or career in Christian education, and talked about like how like I can't remember exactly how it said, like the current student or the future student is like, not white, not male. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it's basically making the point that like the era of like 20-something white guy student. And I imagine to some extent in seminary, what are you seeing about how the student body has changed, whether not just in demographics, but also in age, in, I don't know, social income?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up because in my role as Dean of Students, one of my favorite things that we got to do was we hosted or we put on different questionnaires to the entire student body to be able to see like what are the changes that are occurring. And if you looked back 10 years, you could see that exact trend where the age of student has significantly increased.
Yeah.
And this wasn't something that was just at our seminary. We were able to see with the Association of Theological Schools, what are the trends that are going on like nationwide. And a lot of seminaries were seeing that. So even at my local seminary, what was happening was it was no longer like young 20-something white male.
Right.
It was actually our average student was a 34-year-old male who was working full-time and attending seminary part-time. And so that was a huge shift. We also saw a significant increase of more female students that were attending seminary. But what was really fascinating about that was when we asked a male and a female seminary student, like, what is your career outcome or what's your trajectory? Where are you headed? More often than not, the male students were able to have a clear answer to that. And they said, this is exactly what I plan to do. Our female students, not the faintest clue, because I think in the churches, there's not always a clear outcome for what women can do with a theological degree.
Right.
And that was really fascinating to see too. But I loved the fact that we had so many older students that were in their 50s and 60s that had lived these long careers and were now coming back and saying, I just want to grow in my faith and serve my local body. And that was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, again, that even matches what I've seen, again, in mainline context where it's like second and even sometimes, like you said, I think third career, I guess, if your 50s or 60s, you could define it like as a third career almost. Students coming back, certainly an increase in female non-male. Like, I'm curious about too how you saw this challenge play out. I'm assuming it's a challenge of, again, you talked about that, the age increase of the 34-year-old male working full time, whether someone's male or female, if they're in their 30s or 40s, they probably have kids or jobs or responsibilities, relationships. And I imagine that makes this whole seminary experience a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I remember even just, I mean, I was in my late 20s when I did seminary, just thinking about, I didn't have kids yet, but just like the strain on my marriage relationship, and there weren't kids in the picture yet. I mean, obviously there's some kind of growing and changing during seminary. How did you experience it, or how did your seminary experience, like working with students and their families to help support the whole unit?
Oh man. Yeah, that was probably the number one thing that we heard from students. Piece of feedback was,
Yeah,
I am juggling so much right now. And so no longer was it assumed that all of their attention was going to be fixated on the degree that they were receiving. Like, oh,
right,
come for 4 years and then you'll be
right.
done. A lot of our students, like my husband, 8 years in seminary because he's been working full time and
Yeah,
doing this part time. So it was a challenge. And I think it's also because of that reality of having older students, they're not as willing to uproot their families and
right,
move to attend
right.
seminary. So then you have these brick and mortar campuses
Yeah,
that are not being filled by a student body, which is another challenge of, okay, so how do you pivot to online theological education, but not lose the
mm-hmm.
importance of spiritual formation? And that was a tension that we really saw where our faculty deeply cared about, I want to know who these students are. If
Mm-hmm.
we are giving our stamp of approval and saying they're going to go pastor, we want to make sure that we feel good about their character too.
Yeah. Let's talk about that brick and mortar challenge, because I just saw the news yesterday or this week of a seminary I follow. Like, my next guest hopefully will be a professor from Luther Seminary in, I think, Minneapolis. And I just saw that they're selling their campus or making plans to sell their campus. I mean, again, it's nothing shocks me anymore.
Yeah.
Just because, like you talked about, like the financial challenges, and feel free to go into this too if you want to. But you mentioned endowments. Some schools have bigger endowments than others. I know my alma mater, Phillips Seminary, shout out, they support the pod. Like, they have, I think, a fairly healthy endowment, which has very much strengthened their impact and their ability to be sustainable. Like, I gave you a lot there, so respond to what you want to respond to.
Oh yeah. I'm seeing that same thing. And I remember even when I was in that role, it almost felt like monthly is too strong, but certainly quarterly or twice a
Mm-hmm.
year, you would hear the news. I mean, even TED's university, where you're
Yeah.
just like, what happened? And
Yeah.
how did we not see this coming? And how do we try to stay nimble enough to where you can pivot and make those pivots so that way you're not having to sell your campus or, I don't know, like merge with another seminary. And,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a clear cut answer for that, but I think going to the funding piece,
Mm-hmm.
that's really huge. And again, I think it has to be this creative opportunity to try to see, like, our students don't have thousands of dollars that they can pour into seminary education on their own when they know the role that they likely carry is not going to help them pay off their debt anytime soon.
Yeah.
So
Let's
what do we
dive into that more, because I was just listening to a conversation with Chuck DeGroat, and he was talking about, like, when it's funny because I looked up, Chuck DeGroat also teaches a Western seminary, but it's the one in Michigan, not the one you're
Oh,
associated
yes.
with.
Uh-huh.
But he was talking about in this conversation, like, how he's encouraging students, like, hey, it's likely it can be bivocationality or co-vocationality or whatever you name it. Certainly, I think gone are the days in the vast majority of contexts where you can expect to go out and get like a top of the market type job.
Yeah.
So there's these dynamics of, like, colleges and higher education is not getting any cheaper. while conversely, like the pay is. So let's talk about kind of like, you hinted at it earlier, like these cohort models. What are some alternative models of higher education that you've seen or you think should be explored more?
Yeah. I love the cohort-based model, and that was something that Western Seminary did a phenomenal job with. And it really was when they went to faculty members and enabled them to have some creativity and to say, hey, what are you passionate about? What's a program that we could develop that would be appealing to different students? And so what they ended up doing is they would actually partner with specific churches who were kind of larger based churches, but they said, hey, if you can find 20 students, that was give or take, that was around the number that would make it feasible for professors to be able to engage in it. And then the local church would be able to find those students, open up, in a lot of cases, their own facilities for our professors to come, and they would meet once a month. And all the rest of it was online. So it was a far easier sell to students as well, where it was like, hey, give us one day a month where it's an 8-hour day. It's very long. But the rest of it will be online, but you'll have this like beautiful, thriving community. And another seminary I've seen do really well with that is actually Denver Seminary. There's a whole group of Christian female authors, speakers, Bible teachers that are in a cohort actively right now at Denver Seminary. And the stories that they're sharing about just like the life transformation that's happening has been really cool. And for me, I'm like, I want to keep an eye on that because I think that's going to be a really strategic model moving forward. And the other option that I know a lot of seminaries are exploring are stackable certifications. Instead of having like this huge MDiv program that takes 5 years, it's like, hey, what if you were to come in and you could get a certificate in like Bible transformation or whatever? And a lot of times for students, all it takes is them to experience the fruit of what they receive from seminary that then they say, I want to continue on. So then it's great. Let's just continue stacking. And if you stack this many, then you end up with an MDiv. Or you can just get a certificate and call it good.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I think the market, so to speak, is trending in that model, certainly towards like graduate certificates. Like I'm even thinking of like Coursera and these online learning models where you get a professional certificate or a graduate certificate. And like you said, like it's not like immediately taking out a huge student loan. Committing 5 years, like 4, 5, 6 years, 8 years, like your husband. And like you said, if you're like, man, I cannot finish this, like you can walk away with something. Again, I have to give a shout out to my alma mater. They've been exploring this model too through different programs they have. I think it's so good. The other side of this I want to ask about, because you kind of mentioned it, this lack of integration with churches, which I think is a problem in many different ways. If anything, because from my experience, there can be a disconnect to like what the people in the pews are experiencing and where they're at versus like where the professors or students are at. So I don't remember if we talked about this. I wonder, maybe in our email exchanges, but I was thinking about, and I'm curious if you've had an experience of this or thoughts on this, but like I was thinking about like, years ago when I was in Bible college, like the professors were often like local church pastors. And obviously that's going to be variable based on like the region. Like if there's if it's in a small town, there can only be so many like local church pastors, right? I mean, there can be a twofold advantage, certainly more like, obviously, A, there's integration with the churches. B, like, you're not necessarily like, again, for the cost of the seminary, like, you're not like expecting that professor's not expecting a full-time salary. Like, what else have you seen in that regard?
Yeah, I think that's such a great selling point also is for students to know that, the professors that I'm learning from have been church planters or they're an elder at their current church. and they get it. They have a finger on the pulse to what the body is experiencing. And I mean, shout out to Western Seminary. That's one of their main selling points, is the fact that nearly every single full-time seminary faculty member is actively involved and serving in their church. And one of my favorite classes that they held, and my husband got to be a part of this, was it was a professor who continued to serve for decades in youth ministry. And he would ask every single student to bring in a case study from their local church. And he would say, because none of us like attend the same churches here, it's a safe space for you to be able to come and wrestle through, like, how do I navigate this? And how should I respond? So they were doing this in real time. And I loved when my husband came home from those classes and he would just say, man, this case study was so helpful to hear. Like, I've never experienced that before, but it got me thinking, how would I respond? And so I think being able to have opportunities like that, or I've also seen sometimes it's a requirement for first-year seminary students to have a pastor in their local church that's willing to mentor them.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's really cool too, because it's almost this like apprenticeship type thing,
right?
Where the professor has different points throughout the semester where it requires like the pastor to submit a form or maybe have a quick phone call check-in just to see, how are they doing? What are you noticing? What should I be noticing and paying attention to inside the classroom?
Yeah, the apprenticeship model is interesting because, again, like, there's, broadly speaking, in our society, there seems to be hopefully a growing need and hopefully a growing rise in, kind of the trades thing. And again, I'm someone who like really appreciates theological education, but also like, I think we can both agree, like, there's some students who that's not their strength and still are deeply called to love and serve others through the local church. Also feel strongly about their relationship with God and theology, but I want there to be models, I guess, for them to be able to, like, I don't know if valued is the right word, but recognized, certified, that's not the right word, but hopefully you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the unique opportunities that seminary professors get to enter into with students. I remember one faculty member, he actually really struggled with the word calling because he said, I see so many of these students come in and they say, I'm called to be a senior pastor. and he's like, wow, well, what happens if you're not actually very skilled in it, or it's not something that I see for you in the future? And so to their credit, they were willing to have those hard conversations. And it wasn't just like let me tell you, this will never be the case for you, but more so, hey, let's take a step back. And what is that rooted in? And what is your first calling? It's to love God and love others. And let's just take it one step at a time.
Yeah, I'm called to make, $200K as a pastor. So I'm going to speak that into existence. It reminds me of sort of how we got connected. Is it Ariana? Is that how you say her name? Previous guest, Ariana Malloy, who really recommend her book. I'll make sure to link in the show notes our conversation. But, she talked about like that, I can't remember the word, calling burnout or calling shame, when you're like, your title doesn't necessarily attach or correlate with what you're doing, or your calling, I should say. And how to bridge that disconnect. I thought that was so helpful. And again, I think that's the challenge, I suppose, of these online learning models, where it's just like, fill a discussion post, look at slideshows, and write papers. And again, that's very, very boiled down. But like, in the online learning models, what have you seen? Like, what works well to kind of stay? Because like you said, professors want to like invest in students. They don't want to just like read discussion posts, I can imagine.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, briefly, Ariana's book, Healthy Calling, is phenomenal. And I've talked to my husband about it a lot, where he's like, as a pastor, that disconnect that can happen between,
Right.
I used to feel called to this, but now I'm
Right.
so burnt out. Like, how
Right.
do you bridge that gap? So she is a dear friend of mine. So I'm so glad that she connected us. But thinking about online education, like how do you do that well? And I think a lot of it is students who are willing to show up and actively participate, even in a Zoom format. And I know that there's this whole like asynchronous versus synchronous learning.
Right.
And the broader that your student body gets, you start to encounter significant challenges with
Right.
people who are halfway across the world in different time zones. So it becomes more and more challenging, but I do think that there's a way to do it. And even like how you and I are connecting right now via this
Right.
platform, it's like, okay, you can start to get a sense for who is this person and are they who they say they are? So I think it's possible. I know at our seminary, what they offered was it was 1 week, 4 times a year. They called it Threshold, and they would invite students who were distance learners to come to campus and have an in-person experience where they would receive credit for their courses. And it was kind of an intensive process. But I know even for myself, when I was in grad school, I actually went to Gonzaga University as an online student.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was a requirement was, hey, it's a fully online program. However, during your second year, you have to be willing to come to campus for a week-long intensive. So that way you could get to meet the professors face to face. And I really like that model. I know it can be a deterrent to some students who are like, that's so expensive.
Right.
But there's a great value to it.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you. When I was starting seminary, I did online. In the first semester, I didn't go to the campus, and I didn't feel like I was really a seminary student until that second semester where I did a week-long intensive. Like, that's when it hit home. I'm thinking of another example. Like, I think it's Southern Seminary. Can't remember. Can't remember. It's not Southern Seminary. It's like somewhere in Tennessee. There's like a South something.
Southwestern?
No, because anyway, they invited me to like speak up. They just do like these weekly like Zoom cohorts where they just have a speaker like once a week, and students can pop in and get credit for popping in and engaging, like you said, in the conversation or what happens. Like I said, another example, I think, of what you're talking about of these Zoom or online participation cohorts.
Oh, I love that. That's so creative too. Mm-hmm.
I want to ask this too, because I think it's related. You mentioned the challenges of jobs and different time zones and family responsibilities, socioeconomic demographics, so to speak. Like, what do you think schools, like, what have you seen? What do you think schools still need to do? Let's talk about this way, like, to help these non-traditional students.
Yeah. Oh man. I really feel like a lot of it kind of has to go back to decentering the Western white male voice, and seeing like, what can we learn from the global church? And a lot of that has to start at the leadership level, like being willing to invite people who represent the student body and faculty members who more so reflect the student body, because really you can shape a classroom based on the type of faculty that you have. And I think that's something that I would love to see just continue in that direction. And I don't know if this is exactly related or not, but something that's coming to mind is even trying to enhance like lay education, lay theological education for people who are leading Bible studies in their church, or maybe they're community group leaders.
Right.
And they love deep study, but for them, they're like, I would never go to seminary because I work full time and it's not in the cards for me. And that is something where I feel like the Bible Project has done a phenomenal job as kind of this. They offer seminary level education, but it's at a very reduced cost or even free. So I don't know. I wonder if there's an opportunity for seminaries to start trying to think strategically along those lines.
I think that's a great point, because if we think about like the traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, like what's become like the church model, I suppose, over the last 10, 20 years is just like, that 1 hour Sunday morning, like maybe you're in a small group, but like the whole like traditional like Sunday school and then the worship service, where you're getting in Sunday school like 30, 40 minutes of like biblical education discussion, like that's not happening. Like probably in a small group, right? It's like, let's talk about this verse for, 15, 20 minutes. Maybe there's some kind of curriculum. But again, I really like your idea about some kind of lay education program and how that could, and then again, like your point about the Bible Project, like certainly I think seminaries, like they have like, what's the business word? Like they have the market, like they have the resources to be able to like do that well. Like I can't think of like the businessy word, so to speak, but like, they should be able to like, again, it's just kind of thinking outside the box, thinking, long term, how can we engage with different people in different ways because of, like you said, these different challenges.
Yeah, I know. You just reminded me, there were two professors that were so creative, and they came up with a podcast that they wanted to start.
Yeah.
And they titled it Food Trucks in Babylon, because our seminary is based in Portland. And so it was a lot of like, we are in a very interesting place, culturally speaking, where we're still we have a seminary on a hill inside of Portland, which was really fascinating. And so they said, what if we just got professors to be able to talk through, like, what are some of these challenges that we're facing alongside the church, and how do you do that well? And it was really fun because it ended up becoming this really cool admissions piece too, where our admissions team, when talking to students who were like, well, I kind of want to get a feel for what's it like to be a student there. It was like, hey, check out our podcast.
Yes.
And so I feel like, just infusing creativity with that could be really cool. But going back to the piece about churches, when you were saying no longer is it like, 45 minutes to an hour of deep, rich theological study. The church that my husband is currently serving in, they have even seen themselves a trend of like, no longer is it a standard practice for most churchgoers to attend every single Sunday of a month.
Right.
Our average that we're seeing is a lot of people attend 1 or 2 Sundays out of a month. So then it's kind of taking even a further step back. Where you're like, okay, things are shifting.
Yeah, I was recently talking to a UMC denominational leader in Louisiana. He's saying like his data is like 1 out of every 6 weeks, which is just, it's not, I would have said once a month, but I mean, 1 out of 6 weeks doesn't shock me just because, again, what we're seeing from trends. I got to give a shameless plug there. I guess this too, like I do podcast producing. So if your seminary or another seminary wants to get a podcast,
that's awesome,
back in action, I can help you. Shameless plug over. Last question here before we take a break. What do you think we're not talking about enough in theological education that we need to talk about more?
Ooh. This is something that may just be like a personal piece for me because I've worked a lot in marketing as well. And I think it's poor digital presence, where a lot of theological education is like 10 to 20 years behind the times, digitally speaking. And so then I think that's a massive turnoff to students, where there's clunky websites, there's unclear admissions processes. Sometimes when you get inside of student portals, there's just a lot of confusion of like, I'm sorry, how do I submit a project? And so that is something that I feel like I understand the financial component to that, which is why it's challenging to be able to change those things.
Right.
But I do feel like in today's day and culture, it's something that we need to prioritize to be able to meet the students where they're at and try to make it as easy as possible for them to attend.
Well, I'm just glad you didn't say like a better social media presence.
Oh, no.
Maybe you're thinking that, but I could do without like a seminary posting regularly on TikTok. Like
right.
That's another conversation. I appreciate your.
You don't like faculty members doing the TikTok dances,
I don't. Maybe I'm just too snobby. Like I don't need my professor doing TikTok dances. Yep. And I think
I am with you.
Maybe I'm soapboxing here, but I think some spaces, right? Like they just don't lend themselves to. Like I remember 5-7 years ago, I was starting a new church, and I bought this like social media advertising plan for the church, and I quickly realized like this kind of like. You've been in marketing. Like I kind of realized like this kind of marketing vibe is not the kind of vibe that I want from my church. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So, you have some marketing experience. I have some marketing experience. Like marketing can be really ill if it's not done with, I think, some intentionality and integrity, right?
Agreed. Absolutely. Both for churches and seminaries. And
right. Right. Well, let's take a quick break here and let's come back with some closing questions. All right. We're back with Bekah Buchterkirchen. Great to have this conversation. Appreciate your time. And I think I've gotten your name right both times. So hopefully that was the case. Closing questions. You're welcome to take these as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you're Pope for a day, what might that day look like for you?
Oh, I love that. I feel like two thoughts came to mind, and just based on where I'm at in life, I'm like, oh man, it would be so great to implement like high quality, affordable childcare for ministry families. That would be phenomenal. But thinking about it just from a fun, lighthearted standpoint, I think it would be awesome to host an epic barbecue with lawn games on the Vatican lawn and just be like, come one, come all. Let's get everyone together and have some fun.
Okay, that is fun. Yeah, lawn games. I like that. St. Peter's Square, like I've never been there, but
right?
Just a bunch of lawn games, some, smokers. And I guess I have to clarify this. Like, are we talking like hot dogs and hamburgers cookout, or are we talking barbecue, which is like meat, smoked barbecue?
Oh, smoked meat.
Okay.
For sure.
Good.
Yep.
I like that. That's fun. Okay. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
I think the first person that comes to mind for me is Timothy Keller.
Okay.
And I know he hasn't been gone for all that long, but being a family that works in ministry, I feel like he was such a phenomenal example of being a pastor theologian. And I also really appreciated how he passed the baton well. He didn't stay the senior pastor at his church for forever.
Yeah.
And he took a step back, I felt like at a great time, and instead sought to raise up the next generation.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm just like, wow, I need more examples like that in today's church.
What do you think about Tim Keller? When I'm thinking about through the lens of, we've seen so many like church leaders, whether it's moral failings, whether it's narcissistic trips, whether it's, obviously nobody's perfect. I'm sure Tim Keller has his flaws. Certainly there's things that I've disagreed with him about, but I also recognize he's a very wise man. Like, what do you think? What are some traits that you think he showed that are worth emphasizing, that are especially important for leaders today?
I feel like he showed up remaining curious. He didn't strike me as someone that was really prideful. I feel like how he approached the scriptures was with a willingness to say, here's what I believe, but I could be wrong. And to welcome different perspectives in a way that I miss that from what we're seeing in today's context. And I also liked that as far as I could tell, it seemed like he didn't just covet the pulpit all by himself.
Yeah.
He wasn't the primary teacher 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to that. And I crave that in my own local church setting of like, I want to see different people sharing about their insights with who God is.
Yeah, that's good. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oof. Man, that's so tricky. I feel like it'll probably remember that we lived in a time of like deep cultural polarization and digital noise. But that I feel like a lot of people were quietly longing for something deeper.
Yeah.
And I can sense that just seeing where things are headed right now. It's like you can see that there's a deep level of sadness, but people don't know exactly what to do with it.
All right, I've got to give another shout out then for my next guest, Andrew Root, whose book is, and if you haven't read it, I really recommend it, Evangelism in the Age of Despair.
Amazing.
And it's just basically that our world is just deeply sad. And I mean, I think it's heartbroken. And I think one of the things that, I mean, I think there's so many people who are nihilistic to a point, and they're hungering for something more, and they're chasing it in these dangerous, dangerous patterns. So I don't want to take too long on that, but yeah, appreciate you sharing that. Something more positive. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
Yeah, I have a lot of hope that we would learn to truly embody what it means to love God and love others. And I think to not get so caught up in who's wrong or who's right, especially about secondary theological issues. If there's anything about living in today's cultural context that I'm sensing, it's like, you know what? We need to go back to the basics. And even though it sounds so simple to preach the gospel and to not get so sidelined about all of these other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, share where folks can connect with you and reach out to you if so desired.
Yeah. The best place to do that is at my website, bekahbuck.com. I have a lot of K's in my name too. So BekahBuck.com. And now I predominantly do a lot of writing, speaking to moms who are kind of in the trenches of motherhood, but still want to pursue the Lord daily, even when they worry it's not enough. So that's where they can find me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the conversation. We always leave folks with a word of peace, so may God's peace be with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I received that, and thank you likewise for having me. It was a wonderful discussion.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Loren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.